I'm Elizabeth at Literary Princess. If you are new here, welcome. I have a PhD in English literature with a focus on Victorian women novelists, and as you might expect, I love to read. Today I have the final installment in the 18th century novel project for you. We will be looking at Camilla by Frances Burney from 1796. So it turns out this actually should have been November's book, and the Italian should have been our last book, because the Italian came out in December of 1796, but is always said to be from 97. So yeah, I got that messed up, but oh well. So Camilla is our final book. So how does this work? First, I am going to give a brief history and summary of the novel before moving into what I saw as some of the major themes and ending with my thoughts on it just as a book. There will be spoilers, please do be warned, so if you don't want to know what happens, you should not watch this video. So, Camilla's a big one, so let's jump in. Frances Burney, nicknamed Fanny, and pretty much called that by scholars until like really recently, was born June 13th, 1752, and she died January 6th, 1840 at the age of 87, so she lived a few years into the Victorian period. She was the daughter of the musician Dr. Charles Burney, and as a result was exposed to a lot of intellectual and creative people from a very young age. So she started writing when she was very young, but for some reason she had this idea that it was like morally wrong, and you can see this in her journals. She's always like, oh, I should stop writing. I'm gonna burn all my writing, but she kept going back to it. So her first novel, Evelina, was published in 1778 while she was still pretty young. She kept it a secret from her father, who found out only after reading it. And she was really nervous about what he was going to think, but he turned out to be incredibly supportive. So, all that worry for nothing, I guess. She wrote 3 more novels, Cecilia from 1782, Camilla, which we're going to be talking about, from 1796, and The Wanderer, or Female Difficulties, from 1814. She also wrote plays, a biography of her father, and was a prolific diarist. Her letters and journals are available in Penguin edition and possibly in Oxford, I don't remember. From 1786 to 1790, she was in the household of Queen Charlotte as the keeper of the robes, whatever that means. Camilla is actually dedicated to Queen Charlotte. In 1793, she married French exile Alexandre D'Arblay, I think. She was 41, so like this was a really odd marriage, but okay, whatever. I'm happy for her. 3 years later, she published Camilla. This was published by a subscription, which is this kind of crowd-sourced funding way of publishing a book. It's almost like Kickstarter. Like that's the modern equivalent. And there were a lot of notable people in the subscriber list, but the most notable was Jane Austen, who was yet unknown and unpublished. So this book was very popular, but it was actually criticized by the reviewers as being too long. We'll talk about that. And overly didactic, which, like, I'm sorry, all of your literature is overly didactic. I didn't find this any more didactic than anything else I have read, but okay. So Burney ended up revising it in 1802, and it was 500 pages shorter. So, I mean, of course, their pages, the way that they did them, are not the same as like our pages now. But for some reference, this is just over 900 pages without the notes. So cut 500 it would be like that. Look at the difference. Look at the difference. That's insane. We'll talk more about that in a bit. What is this actually about? So we're following a group of young people who are all kind of in the Tyrolde family. We have Camilla and her siblings, brother Lionel and sisters Lavinia and Eugenia. We have their cousins, Claremont and Indiana Lynmere. We have their father's ward, Edgar Mandelbert. And then we have Sir Hugh Tyrolde, who is the uncle to Camilla and her siblings, as well as to their other cousins. And he is very, very sweet and very, very well-intentioned, but he's kind of an idiot. Yeah. So when they are young, as a result of his poor choices and actions, the youngest Tyrolde daughter, Eugenia, catches smallpox and is permanently scarred, as well as has her growth stunted from it. And then, as if that's not bad enough, there is an accident that Sir Hugh causes that leaves her physically disabled. So he feels horrible and decides he is going to make her his sole heir. He's not going to give any money to the other siblings and cousins. Eugenia will inherit everything. Sir Hugh also likes matchmaking, like more than Emma Woodhouse likes matchmaking. And he decides early on that Indiana is going to marry Edgar Mandelbert, the ward of Mr. Tyrolde, who is incredibly wealthy and has a whole estate. And the nephew, Claremont, is going to marry Eugenia, his cousin, because it seems awfully hard that Claremont gets nothing when it would have been him who would have inherited a lot of the stuff, because he was like kind of the oldest male cousin. So Sir Hugh has all this planned out. Naturally, that's not how any of this goes. So time passes and we are watching these young people go into town for the first time and kind of come out into society, meeting new people. They're away from their parents. And there's all these different love connections. It turns out Edgar and Camilla are in love with each other, but neither of them really realizes it. Edgar, I hate Edgar. We'll talk about him, but he keeps trying to give advice to Camilla that she means to take, but then circumstances end up being she can't take it because she's incapable of saying no to anybody. And then Edgar seems to think, because she hasn't taken his advice, that she's like becoming a woman of the world and is not as virtuous as he thought her. A whole lot of stuff happens. There are elopements, there are kidnappings, there are... It's insane. But ultimately what happens is Camilla ends up in a lot of debt because she's never been taught to say no. And it's a whole big drama. She almost dies. Like, but then at the last moment, she is saved by Edgar, who finds her at this inn she is at, dying. And he brings her parents to her, and they are able to clear everything up. And it ends with happy marriage between him and Camilla. And the other young people are also married off. That is like a basic, super bare bones plot. As you can see, this thing is ginormous. There's so much happening in here. But that's like the main through plot, I would say. So, what are some major themes? So the biggest one that I noticed is this idea of like beauty versus good character. and beauty being the inferior one. And this is most often portrayed through comparing Indiana with Camilla. So Camilla is a very virtuous person. She's very good. She's pretty, but not like the most beautiful woman ever. But the big thing about her is she's kind. She wants to help people. Her cousin Indiana is the most gorgeous woman that's ever lived. Unfortunately, she's very shallow. She's kind of a jerk, and she's not very smart. So we have a lot of comparing of these two. We also get Indiana compared a lot to Eugenia, who has been educated very well. So we have this, but of course is disabled, and her face is scarred from the smallpox. So beauty versus intelligence as well as good character. Early on, when they're pretty young, Edgar at first thinks that Indiana is beautiful, but then he sees that she is kind of a jerk. And Edgar heard her with surprise and wondered to find how much less her beauty attracted him from the failure of her good nature. In comparison, Camilla is incredibly kind and feeling toward other people. Edgar, delighted and relieved, thought she was grown 1,000 times more beautiful than Indiana. Early on, when they arrive in town, there is a woman outside of where they're going who's begging for somebody to just hear her out, what she has to say. Indiana, who was placed under the care of Edgar, enchanted to again display herself, where sure of again being admired, neither heard nor saw the petitioner, but dimpling and smiling, quickened her motions toward the assembly rooms, while Camilla, who was last, stopping short, said, "What is the matter, poor woman?" Camilla, accustomed from her earliest childhood to attend to the indignant and unhappy, felt neither retreating shame nor parading pride in the office. She helps this woman with her petition, which her husband is on trial. And it ends up being like she becomes very involved in these people's lives. So we get another description of Indiana. Indiana was a beauty of so regular a cast that her face had no feature, no look to which criticism could point as susceptible of improvement, or on which admiration could dwell with more delight than on the rest. But here ended the liberality of nature, which, in not sullying this fair workmanship by enclosing it in what was bad, contentedly left it vacant of whatever was noble and desirable. Jeez. And there's a lot about how beauty is fleeting, whereas good character is forever. So Camilla is talking to her friend, Mrs. Arlbury, regarding Indiana's beauty and how men flock to it. Oh, intolerably with the men. They are always enchanted with something that is both pretty and silly, because they can so easily please and so soon disconcert it. And when they have made the little blooming fools blush and look down, they feel nobly superior and pride themselves in victory. Dear creatures, I delight in their taste, for it brings them a plentiful harvest of repentance when it is their connubial criterion. The pretty flies off and the silly remains, and a man then has a choice companion for life left on his hands. And Mr. Tyrrell actually says something very similar to Eugenia, who has been raised to be unaware of how other people are going to view her disability and her scarred face. She doesn't realize that she's going to be ridiculed for being ugly. And when she is utterly broken by it. Her father tries to comfort her by comparing her with Indiana and asking, well, would you rather be Indiana? And at first she's like, yeah, I would, actually. He says, happiness is in your power, though beauty is not, and on that to set too high a value would be pardonable only in a weak and frivolous mind, since whatever is the involuntary admiration with which it meets every estimable quality and accomplishment is attainable without it. Imagine but what would have been the fate of Indiana had your situations been reversed, and had she, who can never acquire your capacity, and therefore never attain your knowledge, lost that beauty which is her all, but which to you, even if retained, could have been but a secondary gift. How short will be the reign of all that? How useless in sickness, how unavailing in solitude, how inadequate to long life, how forgotten or repiningly remembered in old age, you will live to feel pity for all you now covet and admire, to grow sensible to a lot more lastingly happy in your own acquirements and powers, and to exclaim with contrition and wonder, time was when I would have changed with the poor mind-dependent Indiana. There's so many more examples throughout this whole book. I feel like it's just like constant comparing of Camilla in Indiana and Eugenia in Indiana. But we also have a major theme that we've seen throughout so many of these novels, which is marriage for love versus marriage for social status and money. So Edgar was educated by a Dr. Marchmont, who has a very low opinion of women and is actually part of why Edgar has so many issues. But in discussing marriage and women, he says the influence of friends, the prevalence of example, the early notion which every female imbibes, that a good establishment must be her first object in life, these are motives of marriage commonly sufficient for the whole sex. He is trying to convince Edgar not to propose immediately to Camilla. Of course, Camilla is not like that. Camilla is absolutely horrified at the idea of marrying for status and money. When it's suggested by Mrs. Arlbury, Camilla responds, situation in life. Do you think he can ever suppose that would have the most minute weight with me? She's horrified. And at another point she says, oh, if once I could annihilate every mercenary suspicion, if once I could shew Edgar that his situation has no charms for me, and it has none, then indeed I am his equal, though I am nothing, equal in what is highest, in mind, in spirit, in sentiment. And when there is another rich man who is wanting to marry her, and Mrs. Arlbury is talking about how advantageous it would be, Camilla resentfully interrupted her, disclaiming with Sir Sedley, as with everyone else, all possibility of alliance from motives so degrading, and persisted in declaring that the most moderate subsistence with freedom would be preferable to the most affluent obtained by any mercenary engagement. But of course, the rest of their society does is marrying for these reasons of money and class. We have Indiana considering her potential marriage to Edgar. She is at one point rather upset with him. She even wished to refuse him. But Beech Park, the equipage, the servants, the bridal habiliment. No, she could enjoy those, if not him, and neither her own feelings nor the lessons of Miss Margland, her governess, had taught her to look upon marriage in any nobler point of view. And we see the effects of these kinds of marriages, particularly in the character of Mrs. Burlington, who is a young 18-year-old woman who was married to a man that she really had no interest in because her friends wanted her to marry well, and she's very unhappy. She said, my friends are kind and good, but the temptation of seeing me rich beguiled them. I was disinterested and contented myself, but young and inexperienced, and I yielded to their pleadings, unaware of their consequences. Alas, I was utterly ignorant both of myself and the world. I knew not how essential to my own peace was an amiable companion, and I knew not then that the world contained one just form to make me happy. This almost ruins her in the end, because she has found this other person she is in love with. This is a theme that has come up again and again throughout all of these, so many of these novels. Not all of them, but the vast majority of them, and continues to come up in the novels of the next century too. Another theme that we have here that we have seen before is female education. So Eugenia is very interesting in that she has been brought up with a boys' education. She has learned Greek and Latin through this kind of well-meaning idea of Sir Hugh's that his nephew Claremont will want a woman who is intellectually equal to him. Spoiler alert, Claremont does not want a woman that's intellectually equal to him. But so we are comparing the educations of many of these different women. We have the women who have no education, but the typical ones of women of the time. We have Camilla, who is educated, but not the same way as Eugenia, but knows a little bit more about kind of the world, although not that much more. So we get this description of Eugenia. Eugenia, though she saw some disturbance, understood not these changes. This is regarding Camilla and her feelings about Edgar. Early absorbed in the study of literature and languages, under the direction of a preceptor who had never mingled with the world, her capacity had been occupied in constant work for her memory, but her judgment and penetration had been wholly unexercised. So even though Eugenia is so well educated, is very intelligent, she's not very worldly wise or educated about the workings of people. And this leads to some issues for her, some really big issues later on with a very bad marriage. But her education is also considered a good thing when her and her father are discussing the whole would you rather be Indiana. She says, was my mother unapprised of the worldly darkness in which I have been brought up? Is she unacquainted that a little knowledge of books and languages is what alone I have been taught? We are all but too apt, answered Mr. Tyrrell mildly, though surprised, to deem nothing worth attaining but what we have missed, nothing worth possessing but what we are denied. How many are there amongst the untaught and unaccomplished who would think an escape such as yours of all intellectual darkness a compensation for every other evil? There's also the idea that a woman should be led by a well-educated and moral man. So Camilla, whose education, though private, had not, like that of Eugenia, been secluded and studious, was far less credulous than her sister, though equally artless. She knew, too, with regard to this affair, the opinion of Edgar, and to know and be guided by this was imperceptibly one. Yeah. And then we have a description of Mrs. Burlington's education, which has also left her unequipped for anything. She had been an orphan from earliest years and left with only a brother to the care of a fanatical maiden aunt, who had taught her nothing but her faith and her prayers, without one single lesson upon good works, or the smallest instruction upon the practical use of her theoretical piety. All that ever varied these studies were some common and ill-selected novels and romances, which a young lady in the neighborhood privately lent her to read, till her brother, upon his first vacation from the university, brought her the works of the poets. Brought up thus to think all things the most unusual and extraordinary, due to living in Wales, where it's beautiful, and also to reading all these romantic poets, were merely common, and of course she was romantic without consciousness and eccentric without intention. Nothing steady or rational had been instilled into her mind by others, and she was too young and too fanciful to have formed her own principles with any depth of reflection or study of propriety. So we have all of these different examples of inadequate education. Like Eugenia's education is great, but it is inadequate because she does not understand the world and it puts her in danger. Mrs. Burlington's education, completely inadequate. Indiana's totally inadequate. Camilla is probably the most equipped because her education has taught her, I should rely on Edgar. Is this a great message? No, but here we are. We also have a theme that we saw particularly in Mary Wollstonecraft's Mary, this idea of sensibility. Camilla is a very emotional person, and her parents are always warning her against this. Risk not, my dear girl, to others those outward marks of sensibility, which to common or unfeeling observers seem but the effect of an unbecoming remissness in the self-command which should dignify every female who would do herself honor. So this idea that particularly in matters of love, you should not show those feelings. This was a big thing throughout the 18th and 19th centuries. We see it again in, we saw it in one of the other books at least. I don't remember which one, but we see this in Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. That's a big part of it. And toward the end of the novel, once, you know, everything has almost gone to crap, Camilla's mother tells her, it is time to conquer this impetuous sensibility, which already in its effects has nearly broken all our hearts. With what horror have we missed, with what agony sought you? Now then, that at length we find you, excite not new terror, but consigning yourself to willing despair. She is dying because she's kind of like, well, I'm giving up. Like, I want to die. And this is portrayed as very bad, and like, don't do that. You need to conquer this sensibility. The final theme I want to briefly mention is the power struggle between men and women. So Mrs. Arlbury very much thinks that women should have the power, and we are not supposed to agree with her. She's not portrayed as the person we're supposed to agree with. However, I agree with her in a lot. Men, my dear, are all spoiled by humility and all conquered by gaiety. Amuse and defy them, attend to that maxim, and you will have the world at your feet. And a young woman is never in her proper place, as such sort of old friends are not taught to know their own. From the instant you permit them to think of being offended, they become your masters, and you will find it vastly more convenient to make them your slaves. But of course, at the end, it's confirmed that Camilla should have been guided by Edgar this whole time. Had I trusted you as I ought, from the moment of your generous declaration, had my confidence been as firm in your kindness as in your honor, what misery had I been saved from this connection, from my debts, from every wide-spreading mischief. I could have then erred no more, for I should have sought but of your approvance. So, not some great feminist, obviously, but you know. So those are the major themes that I wanted to touch on. What did I think of this as a book? It's way too long. Why is this so long? Like, I wouldn't cut 500 pages out of it, but there were whole characters that I was like, why are you here? Like, whole sections. I was just like, Burney, this didn't need to be here. That being said, I did enjoy it quite a bit. I like Burney's writing. I enjoy her characters, with the exception of Edgar, who we'll talk about in a minute. But yeah, I did enjoy it. It really is too long, which is insane because it's actually shorter than Cecilia, which is my favorite book by her. But Cecilia didn't feel nearly this long. Like, there weren't parts of Cecilia where I was like, you could have just taken this whole thing out. Whereas with Camilla, I was like, you could have taken a whole bunch of this out. My other, like, problem was Edgar. I hate him. He's awful, okay? He is the most interfering, self-righteous, obnoxious little... I have quotes. Again, we get Mrs. Arlbury talking, and she like clocks Edgar immediately for what he is. But of course we're not supposed to agree with her, but I totally do. That Mandelbert, you must know, is my aversion. He has just that air and reputation of faultlessness that gives me the spleen. I hope, for her sake, Camilla's, he won't think of her. He will lead her a terrible life. A man who piques himself upon his perfections finds no mode so convenient and ready for displaying them as proving all about him to be constantly in the wrong. Yes, 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 yes. Which, perfect example. Camilla is out in society with her friend Mrs. Burlington, who Edgar was like, well, don't make this, don't like become good acquaintances with her because we don't really know her. You need to wait for me to find out about her. And he sees that, like Camilla is talking to Sir Sedley, like just talking to him. Alas, thought he, the degradation from the true female character is already begun. Already the lure of fashion draws her from what she owes to delicacy and propriety to give a willing reception to insolence and foppery. Dude, she's being polite, first of all. Second of all, Sir Sedley had actually saved her life earlier, like a few chapters ago, which Edgar doesn't know, but also like, why are you judging my guy? Get out of here. We have more of Mrs. Arlbury's thoughts on him. He is a watcher, and a watcher, restless and perturbed himself, infests all he pursues with uneasiness. He is without trust, and therefore without either courage or consistency. Today he may be persuaded you will make all his happiness. Tomorrow he may fear you will give him nothing but misery. Yet it is not that he is jealous of any other. 'Tis of the object of his choice he is jealous, lest she should not prove good enough to merit it. And she continues on, Mandelbert is a creature whose whole composition is a pile of accumulated punctilios. That's a different word. He will spend his life in refining away his own happiness, but do not let him refine away yours, Camilla's. He is just a man to bewitch an innocent and unguarded young woman from forming any other connection, and yet when her youth and expectations have been sacrificed to his hesitation, to conceive he does not use her ill in thinking of her no more, because he has entered into no verbal engagement. If his honor cannot be arraigned of breaking any bond, what matters merely breaking her heart? Yeah. I mean, he turns out to not be quite as bad as all that, but like we get pretty close to it. And then one more quote hating on Edgar. So he's talking with Dr. Marchmont, who's actually like coming around to being like, oh no, Camilla really does love him. Edgar says, loves me? Ah, Dr. Marchmont, could she then thus grieve and defy me? Which like I'm like, it just proves everything Mrs. Albury said. She's completely correct. Yeah, we're supposed to think this is a happy ending that these two end up together. No, I hate this man. That being said, I really enjoy having a character to hate like that, so yes, I hate him, and I don't really like that they ended up together, but it was fun to hate him, so, you know. I ultimately gave this 4 stars. Again, I did really like it, and I think there is a great story here and some really great characters. I do think it's too long, but I still think it's worth reading, and I am very glad that I read it. It's not my favorite Burney, but it would be worth rereading at some point. So, solid 4 stars. So, that is my thoughts on Camilla by Frances Burney. Let me know down in the comments below. Have you read Camilla? What did you think of it? Do you agree with some of my points? Disagree with me? So, this is the last video on a single book for the 18th Century novel project. I am going to do one more video, which I'm going to film right after this, ranking all of the books, and that will be the official wrap-up of the 18th Century novel project. So I'll kind of give my final thoughts on the whole project there. So if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to see more of my bookish content. It has been great chatting with you. I will see you soon. Bye.